This horrible story is about a young girl who was found under a bridge. The police was faced with the main question: did the victim jump herself, or did someone deliberately push her? Thanks to the surveillance cameras, they found the answer and were able to reconstruct the chronology of that night. In this video, we will tell you what happened to Rachel Siani. On April 1, 2000, a man was driving across a bridge in Burlington, New Jersey. On the ground below him, he noticed something that looked like a human body and called the police. The detectives arrived at the scene and saw a young girl in front of them who didn't have any identifying documents on her, which is why they couldn't establish her identity. Everything looked as if she took her own life by jumping off this bridge. The height of the bridge in that place was about 115 feet, which can be roughly compared to the height of a 10-story building. Of course, the body was badly damaged after the fall, so the police could only wait for the autopsy results. While the medical experts were doing their job, the detectives had to determine the identity of the deceased. They shared descriptive information about her in local newspapers and news programs, and it quickly paid off. The girl's ex-boyfriend recognized her as 21-year-old student Rachel Siani. Rachel Elizabeth Siani was born on April 18, 1978, in the relatively small American city of Bensalem, Pennsylvania. When she was still very young, her parents divorced, and a few years after that, her mother passed away. The girl and her two brothers stayed with their father and his new wife. The couple also had 2 children together. The family didn't have a lot of money, but they didn't live in poverty either. They all lived together with no conflicts, and the stepmother treated her husband's children well. After high school, Rachel got into the Bucks County Community College in Newtown since her family simply didn't have money to pay for a private one. Community colleges can't be called prestigious, but the educational costs are much lower. There, she studied psychology and later started attending an acting class. Despite the low cost of her education, the girl still had to work to pay for college and an apartment nearby. Then, Rachel got a job at the Diva nightclub as a dancer. She hid this fact from the family for a while, but they soon found out about it and expressed their disapproval. However, the father and stepmother admitted that the girl was already an adult and had the right to do what she wanted. According to the relatives, they didn't have any serious conflict because of this. At the club, Rachel made a lot of money, especially by the standards of 2000. Working 3 to 5 days a week, she earned about $400 a night. Despite all this, she was very frugal. She had to pay $1,000 per semester to study. That's not counting the cost of textbooks. Rachel drove an old beaten car and lived in a place with 7 other tenants. Now it's no longer possible to find out what she was saving for, but with her income from the club, she could afford anything and live her life to the fullest. Now that we know some information from her biography, let's get back to the bridge under which Rachel's life ended. The police quickly dismissed the theory that the girl jumped herself because there was blood on the bridge. The examination showed that it belonged to Rachel, which meant that she was most likely killed. The preliminary theory of the investigators was that someone stabbed the girl and then knocked her over the railing of the bridge. It was difficult to establish the exact cause of death. The problem is that people get lots of injuries after falling from a great height, and it could be impossible to see anything beyond those injuries. The police started to search for suspects and immediately concentrated their efforts on the club where the girl worked. There, they found their first clue. The management of the establishment told them about a former employee who was fired for harassing Rachel. The detectives examined him, looking for signs of involvement in the case, and concluded that he was innocent. After that, they had a new suspect, a regular customer of the club named Jack Denofa. The 35-year-old man had his own business that made good money. He and his wife lived in a large, presentable house, and had a good reputation among the neighbors. The wife knew that Jack regularly visited the club with dancers, but she didn't try to interfere in any way. Moreover, several times, she personally drove him home from there when he couldn't drive the car on his own. Otherwise, Jack stayed at a hotel near the club for the night. In 1999, he was arrested for drunk driving, and a repeated violation could lead to the loss of his driver's license. Rachel was his favorite dancer. He left her the most generous tips and often paid hundreds of dollars just to talk to her. To establish Denofa's involvement in the case, the police reconstructed the chronology of the events of the last day of Rachel's life. On March 31st, she finished with her shift at the club, changed into her jeans and sweater, and then headed to a bar. Jack went with her, but in a different car. They were also joined by Rachel's friend Rebecca. As the girls were sitting in the car, she took a photo of Rachel, and it was this photo that would later help the police in confirming the identity of the deceased. That night, Denofa got drunk and started knocking on the doors of the Diva Club when it was already closed. A passing policeman noticed it, but the security guard and the manager of the establishment convinced him that Jack was a regular customer and didn't pose any danger. After that, Rachel decided to walk heavily drunk Denofa to his hotel, and this was the last time she was seen alive. The police started looking for evidence from this room in the hotel, and they immediately found something interesting. They found blood in the shower, but there wasn't enough of it to conduct a DNA test. Then they studied the recordings from a few surveillance cameras, and they were very lucky. On one of the highways leading to the bridge, they noticed Denofa's pickup truck, and there was something that looked like a human body lying in the open truck bed. In 2000, the quality of the surveillance cameras left much to be desired, but this was enough for the police. Denofa officially became the main suspect in this case, and very soon, the detectives managed to find a witness who also saw this pickup truck that night. A tractor driver was driving past Jack's car on the same lane. His seat was high enough to clearly see the body in the back of the pickup truck. The witness managed to see that the man was wearing dark trousers and white socks. He didn't notice the driver's face, but he did manage to make out something. The man's hair was damp and slicked back as if he had just come out of the shower. You probably already have a logical question. Why didn't the witness report what was happening to the police? As he admitted during the interrogation, he didn't really see anything criminal in what he witnessed. He thought that the person in the back was just drunk and was being taken home from some party. All of this happened at about 3 a.m. The police continued to examine the camera footage and saw Denofa's car come back 25 minutes later, no body in the back anymore. With such a set of evidence, they interrogated the man, but he denied any involvement. Meanwhile, forensic scientists examined his pickup truck and found traces of blood there. The DNA analysis showed that the blood belonged to Rachel. Jack continued to deny everything. After being presented with the results of the DNA examination, the man said that he wasn't the one driving the car, that it was someone else. According to him, the Diva Club employees took away his keys several times when he was too drunk to drive. So, they had the chance to make a duplicate to set him up. Of course, the police couldn't actually believe this story and arrested Denofa, charging him with murder. The prosecution worked everything out to the smallest details. According to the forensic pathologist report, Rachel was being strangled shortly before her death. According to the investigation, that night the girl accompanied Denofa to his room where she planned to talk to him as usual and get good money. But the man started to harass her, trying to force her to sleep with him. Rachel turned him down, and then he lost his temper and attacked her. Most likely, Jack thought that the girl was dead, which wasn't the case. So then he had to ask himself, what to do next. He couldn't leave her body there because the room was booked under his name. Taking her out of the building through the back door was also too risky. Then he decided to throw her through the balcony directly into the back of his pickup truck, but he didn't succeed and the girl fell to the ground. The forensics later found traces of blood in the parking lot. Then he managed to put her into the back of his car and drove to that very bridge where Rachel's life ended. This story is corroborated by the testimony of the hotel administrator. First, he saw Denofa briskly walk towards the parking lot in the middle of the night. Later, he returned and after some time came to hand over the keys to the room. He didn't say a word and he smelled like soap. The judge set the bail for Jack at $1 million, but later cut that amount in half. More than 20 of his friends came to the hearing, which should have resulted in a decision to release the accused on bail. All of them spoke positively about Denofa, and some even helped him to collect the amount of money necessary for the bail. The trial lasted a month. All this time, Jack never spoke in person, entrusting all the work to his lawyers. And they did their best to justify him. Realizing that there was too much evidence against their client, they tried to discredit the victim. She was believed to have affairs with many men, was allegedly acquainted with a dangerous gang of bikers, and had an addiction to illegal substances. The court could find no confirmation of any of this. The trial was actively covered in the newspapers, and this deserves a separate mention. Most publications presented the material as if Rachel was the one to blame for her death. The fact that she worked as a dancer in a nightclub was highlighted in almost every article, starting with the headlines. The publications happily reprinted the unverified information about her lovers and illegal substances, which was spread by Jack's lawyers. The newspapers often called him a businessman and a family man with a good reputation. The fact that a married man spent tons of money on dancers and alcohol in questionable places was hardly mentioned. The motives of the journalist are simple. Most readers are more interested in reading a story with a bunch of dirty details, machinations, and unexpected twists than reading another boring story about a simple murder. Fortunately, all of the above didn't help Jack escape punishment. Too much evidence suggested that it was he who was involved in the death of the girl. On November 29, 2002, a jury found him guilty. The court sentenced Denofa to the maximum sentence under this article, life imprisonment with the right to petition for early release after 30 years in prison. After the verdict was announced, Jack made his first speech at the trial. He briefly declared his innocence and expressed the hope that the real killer would be found. Apparently, he said what the lawyers told him to. Immediately after the verdict was announced, they started to appeal and look for loopholes that could pull their client out. And they almost succeeded. Given that these events were unfolding on the border of the two states, the lawyers jumped at this opportunity. A jury only had a right to convict the suspect if the victim died in their state. Jack's hotel was in Pennsylvania, and the bridge was in New Jersey. According to the conclusion of one of the forensic experts, Rachel died from falling from the bridge, which meant that Denofa could only be tried in Pennsylvania. However, this only gave Jack the right to request bail, which was already $1 million. But there was one nuance. His father, who helped pay for the lawyers, had already spent all the money on them, and he simply couldn't find $1 million more. Moreover, he also didn't have the funds to keep those top-tier lawyers, so Jack had to use the services of a free lawyer. Later, the court rejected Denofa's claims related to legal subtleties about the right to impose a sentence. For this reason, he remained in the New Jersey prison with the same sentence where he remains to this day. he will be able to file his first petition for early release only in 2032. The man doesn't lose hope of getting out earlier and constantly bombards the court with appeals that don't give any results. Maybe if the lawyers had chosen a different line of defense, Jack could have received a lighter sentence. But they were either confident they would win, or Denofa rejected any suggestions to testify and admit his guilt. But all of this wouldn't have changed the fate of Rachel Siani, who was murdered at the age of 21. In such a case, there will always be discussions about how her life would have turned out if she had chosen a different profession. However, the fact remains that nothing can justify premeditated murder. Share your opinion about this story in the comments, and don't forget to support the video with your likes if you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.